Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Joël Franusic. I'm a product marketing manager and a developer at Okta. And here with me,
I'm Farnsworth-Kumli, and I'm an associate sales engineer here at Okta.
Great. Well, today we're going to be talking about extending Okta with code. And you might have been wondering why it was so vague. We were trying not to ruin the surprises in the keynotes, but what we're going to be doing today is going into depth on the keynotes that Zhang and the demos that Zhang and Teju did during the keynote session. So how many of you here were in the keynote session? All right, basically everybody. We'll be covering some of what was there for those of you who weren't, but just was interested in knowing who was there. All righty, well, let's get into our talk. Here's the exciting part of our talk. You can bring out your notes and pens and start taking notes. Just kidding.
Legal statement.
Basically, what this means is you probably shouldn't name your kids after any of the things that we're announcing because things are subject to change. Alrighty, let's talk about the agenda. So what we're going to be covering today are the features that powered the customer identity demo that you saw. In particular, we're going to be talking about two of the new features that Okta launched, the Okta Identity Engine and Okta Hooks. And then hold your questions till the end.
Don't interrupt.
No interruptions. We're going to have questions at the end during our Q&A session. All right, so with that, let's talk about the features that powered the keynote demo. So for those of you who've been using Okta for a while, you probably noticed a few things in the demo that looked familiar, things that you could have done already. And so we're going to be covering what in the demo was stuff that's things that you can do now, and what were features or what things you saw in the demo that took advantage of features that are brand new. So one of the things we used in the demo was the custom URL. So this is a feature that a lot of people who use Okta to secure their customer identities have a custom URL, which means that the Okta name isn't visible anywhere in your logs or in your browser screen. And if you'd been able to see the location bars in any of those demos, you would have seen two apps. You would have seen app.ticketco.org and login.ticketco.org. That was powered by an existing feature, which is a custom URL. In addition to that, all of the parts where you saw Teju logging in, entering in her information, answering progressive profiling questions about herself, those were all things powered by a custom hosted sign-in page. So that was HTML that was actually served by Okta, and that integrated in with the custom app that was being demoed. Now what was new was the Okta Identity Engine. So in the demo, Teju was able to register for an account without a password, and that was something that was powered by the Okta Identity Engine. I'm going to touch on it very briefly in this session, but there's a session at 2 p.m. which is going to go into a lot of depth. So I encourage you to go. If you're not going to be able to make it to that session, I'll be touching a little bit more on what the Okta Identity Engine did in terms of this demo. And then we also demoed Okta Hooks. So Okta Hooks is the ability for Okta to call out to external systems and allowing you to use Okta in a very composable way. And then finally, just because I like it so much, there's this great tool called Glitch. Glitch is the tool that we used to build out this demo. It's honestly the coolest software development environment I've used since the 1970s era Symbolics machine, which I have in my house, and I'm not joking. This is actually really cool.
You are old.
I'm 36. 36. But this system that was built before I was born, it was really awesome. Glitch is the first thing that comes close to the power of a list machine. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about the Okta Identity Engine. So I'm going to touch briefly on the things in the demo that you saw powered by the Okta Identity Engine. Teju was moving pretty fast through that, so let's touch a little bit more on what you saw. So the things that the Okta Identity Engine powered in the demo include three of the things. The first things here that you'll see is a passwordless registration. So one of the new things that you can do with the Okta Identity Engine is configure Okta to behave differently from its defaults. And so in this case, we configured Okta to not require a password. So you'll see there all that Teju had to do was enter in her first name, last name, and email, and then she was granted access right off the bat. Similarly, when she went in for a higher assurance scenario, which was when she was going to buy her tickets to the Beyonce concert, she was sent a email asking her to verify that she had access to her email account. That was also powered by the Okta identity engine. And then lastly, the prompting for her favorite genre of music was another thing that was part of that, where Okta detected that there was a profile attribute in her profile that wasn't yet filled out, and so before she was prompted to continue, or before she was allowed to continue, she was prompted for what her favorite genre was.
If I remember correctly, hers was pop. So I'm assuming easy listening is your favorite?
Hey, no judgment, okay?
Like
I spend a
Enya,
lot of time in elevators.
Melanie?
It kind of wears on you, you know? Yeah,
Okay.
no judgments. All right, so you saw Todd talk about this. Basically what Okta's done is taken our decade of experience doing authentication, authorization, and management of users and distilled all of that experience down into these 5 basic components that we provide same defaults for, but we also allow you to upload rules into Okta to change what happens during each of these phases. And again, this is going to be covered in depth at our 2 p.m. session. But I wanted to walk you through 2 of the scenarios that the Okta identity engine powered. So when Teju first registered, she went through this whole flow, except during the authenticate stage, what we have done is said in the authenticate bit, given all of the options that she could have used for authentication, we basically said use none of them. So in the authenticate step, we just said skip all of them. But because it's a little risky to leave registration open to anybody, what we also took advantage of was in this enroll phase, we configured a Okta hook to then check whether that user registration should be allowed to continue. So that was one set of rules for one scenario. So that was the first scenario, which is registering, going into that Ticket Co app, and just browsing local listings. The second scenario was when she went to go purchase a ticket. So in that scenario, it makes sense that you don't want to have more assurance that the person is who they say they are. So in that phase, for this step here, we basically said, rather than not prompting for any type of authentication credentials, to use email. So that's what kicked off that magic link email that got sent out. And Okta handled everything from that point on. So once that link was clicked, Okta validated that user and then continued the user on through this flow. The other thing that happened is post-authentication, without actually any configuration on my end, just by defining a user attribute in the app that was tied to that flow, Okta detected that there was a new required user attribute and then prompted Teju for that attribute. So these are all things powered by the Okta identity engine. However, I'm going to kind of just leave it there and continue on to talk about Okta hooks.
So Joël, correct me if I'm wrong. Okta hooks sounds suspiciously like webhooks.
It's webhooks.
Ah!
How many people here are familiar with webhooks? Oh, excellent. All right, so it's about half the crowd. For those of you that are familiar with webhooks, you've probably seen this presentation here. This is a presentation from Jeff Lindsay, who coined the term webhooks. This was a presentation he gave in 2008. This is a good video to watch if you want to learn kind of the history and the influence, but these days webhooks are a pattern that is used in a bunch of different places. I'm not going to touch on everything that's covered in this video or all the other stuff that's available online, but I do want to touch on one area that is pertinent to what Okta is doing. So let's dial our time machines back to the world of 1970, back when the people who wrote Unix were using teletypes as their interfaces to the PDP-11 you see back there on the screen. The reason why I'm putting my time machine back into 1970 is because of a basic concept that was introduced in that time, this idea of simple programs that did one thing well. Rather than the old kind of batch processing model that happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, a Unix system would have a whole bunch of tiny little programs that would do a single thing and do that thing well. And it would allow you to, basically every program would have a standard input. It would take data in, do its processing, and then give its output on a standard output, allowing you to combine them together in a bunch of different ways. So if you're familiar with our modern day teletypes, which are these terminals, you will be used to seeing something like this. So in the 90s, this is kind of something you would do with this Unix philosophy. So if you wanted to have a report emailed once a week of all the new users added to your user database, you would have written some code that looked something like this, right? You would have had this shell script, which would probably call your LDAP system to query for all the new users this week. You'd filter that through the grep command to get out all the lines that said mail, clean it up with cut, send it over to the mail program, which would then create an email with the subject, this week's new users, and send it on to the admin user. Now, this might be a little confusing, or maybe you're tired of using teletype interfaces for your computer, so you're like, I don't want to look at this screen anymore. So let's think about this from a different perspective. So this basic idea, you can conceptualize it in a different way. You can think of it with this way of building software, you have a bunch of little composable Lego pieces that can be combined in different ways. And so in the example I just gave, it would look something like this. You'd have your custom code, which you then connect with the grep command. The grep command would then be filtered through cut, and then you would send it over to the mail command. Now, the thing to keep in mind is all of these little components can be combined and recombined in different ways. This is a set of composable software. And that concept is really powerful and one of the key influences beyond this idea of hooks and Okta hooks, which brings us to today. So today, with the announcement of Okta hooks, I'm going to kind of cover a little bit about what the problem is that these solve. So let's talk about this concept again. Simple programs that do one thing, do it well. However, when we moved from mainframe machines and teletypes into the world of web applications, we had a world that looked kind of like this. You'd have systems that you could interact with, but you couldn't connect them together very easily. So since 2008, when Jeff Lindsay was talking about webhooks, we now have sites like GitHub, which allow you to connect into stuff like Travis CI and other, Jira and other systems through webhooks. So we now have a world where you can connect them together, but it wasn't always that way. So let's think a little bit more about kind of some scenarios of what this would have looked like. So before Okta was around, you're all familiar with Okta, or at least I'd hope you are, being at an Okta conference. But this is what the world would have looked like before Okta. So you might have this system where when a new user is added to your application, you want that user added to your CRM system, have an email account provision for them. And the way that it used to look is it used to be, well, you have to have people running the process somewhere, either someone running a report or typing something manually. However, as you all know, with Okta, all of this goes away. Now with Okta and the Okta integration network, we have on the order of 6,000 integrations now that makes it possible for you to configure Oktas to say when a new user is added into your Okta tenant, then you take advantage of pre-built integrations to then add that user to an email system into your CRM. But invariably, you'll find that any company that's more than a couple years old is going to have some system somewhere that's custom written. An older company, this might be some old Access database that's lying around. You can't get rid of it. It's critical to the functioning of your company. And there's oftentimes no great ways of interacting with them. So yes, we do have technologies like OPP and SCIM to provision accounts to and from systems, but in the modern world, we have these kind of workflows that people want to do. So let's say you have a workflow now where you want to allow users to register themselves into Okta, and at time of registration, you want to check this existing database. How would you do that? There's no great way of doing that with what we have in Okta. So that's where Okta hooks come into play. So with Okta hooks, it changes to look more like this, where now you can use some custom code that encapsulates your company's specific rules and knows how to talk to your company's proprietary systems. And you can now have this code interface with Okta at various points. So in the example we're giving here, we're talking about self-service registration, and you want to say, at time of registration, I want Okta to ask my custom code, say, hey, the new user is registering, what should I do? And then your custom code can do what it needs to. Maybe you just want to only allow people from a handful of domains to register, in which case you're done. You could say, yes, let that one user in, or no, don't let them in. But following with the example, you could have your code check this custom database. And depending on what's there, it would respond back to Okta, and then Okta would then proceed on as follows. So this is a lot to take in, I realize, but the basic thing to keep in mind is the following. Basically, keep in mind that with Okta, you now have the ability to have Okta be part of this composable system of tools that you can connect in to existing workflows and systems that you have already, and allow you to build off of that.
So at this point, is everybody asleep?
I think a few people are asleep.
We just went through a lot of slides.
We did go through a lot of slides.
Were we going to show any code?
I
Text editor action?
was hoping to show some code, but I didn't get it done in time. Could you
Yeah,
show some
let's take
code?
a look at what we did this morning.
All right, good, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do at this point.
Dance around.
All right.
Let's kill this PowerPoint.
All righty.
All right, cool. So we're going to take a look behind the scenes of the demo that you saw this morning and how it was made possible. And as Joël mentioned before, it's all hosted live at glitch.com/ticketco, so you can absolutely find this and fool around with it yourself. So also, we're going to assume that everyone here has had some familiarity with Node and Express.
Hey, wait, what if I'm an ASP.NET 2 developer?
Joël, you are really old.
36.
Well, okay, you've done some web development. This is probably not a foreign language to you.
All right.
Cool. So we are going to jump in and take a look at our server JS. Cool. So we're going to go through some boilerplate, and it isn't until about here where we're going to go ahead and load our index. So let's take a look at that. Probably going to look pretty familiar. We got some divs. We've got some images. We've even got this neat modal down here that is kicking off this browsing login URL.
What does this all look like? I mean,
You know,
do I have to parse this HTML in my head?
No, I would love to know what this looks like.
I
Let's
think you
take
gotta
a look.
open up a new window.
Yeah, let's open up.
A new window in Chrome.
Yeah. Live demo.
So this is all available as well online. You can go check it out. I see some of you are in that glitch already. Take a
Oh,
look at the
rad.
code.
You guys are good students.
But here,
Looks a
here
little
you go.
something like this, right? So if we hover over this register now, and we even go ahead and copy that link address. Whoop. Paste it in here.
So this is how I use the Okta identity engine. Looks like.
Might look a little familiar.
Yeah, it's
Just OAuth.
just OAuth. So you'll see up there at the very top, kind of on the extension of line 1, you've got the client ID. That's just what connects you in with the OIDC app that you're using. And then you've got the redirect URI, which is where Okta sends you once it's done with its authentication. And then all the other stuff is just kind of standard OAuth.
Standard OAuth. And if we go back, losing my windows. Here we go, to our ticket co. Go back to our server.js. You can see if we scroll a little bit up, this is where we set that up. Pretty simple. Also, if you want to learn more about OAuth and everything that can go wrong with OAuth, Aaron Parecki has an awesome session that's going to be in this very room tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I believe. So definitely would check that out. So this is, we've loaded our page. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we kick off this registration flow. Cool. So we saw Teju successfully register this morning, and we saw this nefarious hacker try and register as well. So let's see how we made that happen.
Anybody here named Ernest Baldwin?
Yeah, well, I am curious what the story is behind Ernest Baldwin.
So we were talking with our friends at Experian, and one of the neat things we learned is sometimes in their production systems they need to have a test user, and there's test users, they have to be people that don't actually exist. So Ernest Baldwin, as spelled like that, is a person who doesn't exist, unless maybe one of you is named Ernest Baldwin, in which case that's probably why you're having trouble with the TSA.
Sorry about that. We should give you a prize if your name is Ernest Baldwin. Awesome. So, looks like we need some additional user verification. So let's see how we made this possible. Jumping back here, if we scroll closer to the bottom, we have this handler for registration.
Yeah, so how does Okta know to call that URL?
Let's check our Okta org.
All right.
So we have this inline hook set up where, again, we want to extend this registration process. We want to call out to some custom code before we want to complete this registration, and depending on what it gets back. So let's take a look at some of that custom code.
Let's take a look. Let's see what it looks like.
Cool. So we have this check identity where If a user is going to successfully pass, we'll go ahead and add them to our universal directory and throw in this custom attribute of customer ID.
Looks like a UUID, just
Standard UUID. And then if it fails, we're going to go ahead and deny registration. And then we have our mock identity verification. This is a demo. Essentially, if anybody is not Ernest Baldwin, they're going to pass. So let's take a look at successfully registering and what that would look like. Awesome. Here we go, kick off this registration flow. And Joël, do you have any user who is not Ernest Baldwin?
well, for a test user, I like using everyone's favorite astromech droid.
I gotcha.
R2? What about R5D4?
You were such a nerd.
Hey, I mean, everyone loves R2.
Awesome. And cool, no surprise, R2D2 has registered and is now freely able to browse our application. So let's take a look at our Okta org. Get out of our hook, into our universal directory, and check it out. We have R2D2 successfully added, is able to browse our applications. And if we take a look at that profile, bada bing, bada boom, we've got this customer ID that we've added.
That's a really good looking UUID.
It's the best ID, I think. But yeah, that's just an example of one aspect of the demo. Let's take a look at what else is going on.
Great.
I'm sure everybody's got a spare hour.
Keep going through the code, right?
Yeah, so let's jump back into our server.js. Just kidding. Everything is hosted at glitch.com/ticketco, so you can fool around with it yourself, remix it, and see what we can do. Find all the bugs that we left for you.
All righty. Thank you, Sarah.
I got applause.
So as Sarah mentioned, this is all available online. You can go check out Glitch for yourself if you haven't seen it before. We also have a couple of other things for you to check out. So as I mentioned several times, we do have a session today at 2 p.m. going into depth on the Okta Identity Engine. Definitely something I recommend checking out. There are also other ways for you to get in depth on this code. So if you're new to San Francisco, you came with a t-shirt and you're thinking, man, San Francisco's going to have nice sunny weather.
You're a fool.
Nope, it's raining.
So gross out.
So if you want to get a hoodie and also learn about Okta hooks in the process, go check out our developer hub down in the expo hall. And there's a cool challenge that you can go through where you can get your hands dirty with Okta hooks. And then finally, all the code that Sarah was showing is available here at glitch.com. And then another thing that we're launching here at Okta as well is we're taking all the sample code and sample projects like that ticket code demo, and we're putting it in one place called toolkit.okta.com, which you can also check out as well. So with that, thank you for not interrupting and watching the demo. And now we're open for any questions that you might have. Now, this is being recorded, so there are microphones to be passed around, or if you shout it out, I'll repeat it for you as well. But any questions? No questions? There's a question over there. Heckling is fine too.
Yeah, just shout.
Yeah. Looks like we have one over here, one back there. We'll get to you in time. Lena, over there.
Oh, there? Sorry.
Yeah.
I walked the other way.
So how are you handling authentication into the webhooks? It looked like it was just a basic auth. Is there any signature authorization to make sure that these webhooks are secure?
So the question was basically, the person here was very astute, was asking how do you authenticate these webhooks? How do you know that it's coming from where you intend it to come from, which is the question basically, right? So as you will notice here, you saw that we have essentially, it's not basic auth, it's just custom headers. So you can put like a bearer token or something like in there. This is something that's in beta, so we're open for feedback on this. I mean, we've talked about doing TLS mutual auth and all sorts of things like that. The very basic, you do have to have let's see if this works, it does. You do have to have HTTPS, and it has to be signed with a TLS cert that is recognized, or is a commonly accepted root. You can do custom headers, but definitely give us feedback on what other type of stuff that you're interested in using for authentication. Other questions? Over there, yeah.
Yeah, so for debugging, is everything through the reports, logging, system reports? How would I know if something's gone wrong?
For the webhooks, right? Yeah, so we do put a decent amount of information if you're debugging your Okta hook. We do put a decent amount of information in the system log. However, these are just in kind of standard web development fashion. There's other places you can insert probes to check what's happening. So for myself, when I'm working with hooks, this is part of why I like Glitch. Glitch gives me the ability to get a log here, so I can see the logging of what's happening as I'm going through here. There's other tools like ngrok, which you can use to, let me put this up here. ngrok allows you to expose a local host on the public internet, and then gives you all these great ways of like inspecting the HTTP requests that are coming across, replaying them, doing stuff like that. So just you kind of use your standard web development toolkit for doing this, and if you've got an environment like a Java or .NET, you can even set breakpoints and stuff like that to see what's happening. Other questions? Got one here, and there's one a couple over here. Yes?
Yeah, so I think regarding the repeat user login, so, if the user comes back in, does he have to then enter the email and the password, or just do two-factor, or how do they get logged in?
So this is part of I guess the question is specific to this demo, or just generally are you wondering how all that works?
Yeah, if you're not setting the password in the original flow,
Sure.
and the user is coming back in, you need to do the authentication, right?
So let's take a look here at how this looks. So I'm going to open up a new incognito window, and I'm going to go to the site here. And so what's happening here, I'm authenticating in using Okta. You can see that URL there at the bottom. Mm-hmm. You typically want to hide that, but it's for the demo purposes, exposing it there so you can see what's happening. And let's do testing.user @mail. So what I'm doing here is registering for a user that doesn't exist in my Okta org yet. Because of the Okta identity engine, I'm not being prompted for a password, but I am being granted a session. Mm-hmm. And so now I have a session, but if I want to go through this demo, and in this case I just click on that link there and I'm going to buy my Beyonce tickets, what you'll notice here is I have another OAuth URL. So Okta understands my Okta session, but when I click here, it understands who I am, but it's now prompting me for this additional information. So it's asking me to log in or validate myself with this email. So I don't have to enter in that information already. It's based on an existing Okta session.
Okay. All right.
We had a couple other questions over here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so if we're a partner of yours, do you support multi-tenant webhooks? So if we wanted multiple customers Okta customers to implement our webhooks to go against our service, is that supported?
So I think the way to think about it just generally is that webhooks are just like any old web application. So the multi-tenancies kind of depends on how your app is configured. So you can have multi-tenancy in several ways, right? So you can have, if each of your customers has a different Okta org, you could then have different hooks configured for that user. You can also have all your hooks go to your single place and handle the multi-tenancy yourself using, other hinting information from there. But just think about it as like a normal web app, right? It's going through your front end, going to your back end. I think based on your use case, it's also something that you can give us feedback on. But I think your basic things to do would be do multi-tenancy either based on having them in separate orgs, or you can expose information, the payload that Okta delivers to you to then decide which tenant it should be for. Other questions?
Yeah, so you mentioned with the identity engine, you're able to figure out if it's a hacker or somebody who's trying to do the same user ID over and over again.
Sure.
It seemed that in your code you had it hard-coded.
It's just
Ernest
mocked out.
Baldwin, but so how does the solution do this every day when you can't hard-code?
So the way that it works, and this is just a mock code, just because there's too many moving parts otherwise. In this bit here, let me see if I can get this code a little bit bigger. What you basically see is Okta's make an HTTP post to your application, and in that post you have a payload which is available in this request body. So here I'm doing it with a mock, and I'm just doing it based on first name, last name. But in that payload, you're going to have everything that was in that user's registration field. So in this case, it'd be first name, last name, email address. You also get the IP address of the user who's registering and the user agent. And that's what we would then expect for you to use with somebody who does proofing or based on your own internal systems to then take that information and make that determination based on that information of whether that user should be allowed it or not. So again, keep in mind this is all custom code that you write, so it's intended to be used, for your company-specific methodologies, right? We're not doing out-of-the-box integrations. We're opening this up for you to use, in your own systems. Does that cover it, sort of? Yeah.
So this morning, during the keynote speech, and I heard that Okta going to run the AI model behind and to detect, whether it's bad apple or not. So does Okta have planned to open the model up and for a customer to have the model locally trained and then hook up to the Okta and pipeline?
Oh, so the question's about the risk engine that Todd announced. It's not a product area that I focus on, so I can only speak kind of in broad terms. But just generally, the plan is to expose all aspects of Okta through hooks so that you can get more information about that. In terms of being able to train the model or get more exposure to that, I'm not sure about that. So you might want to go to a session that covers that and ask that there. Other questions? Hi, yes.
So if I have a use case where the user just submits the first name and last name, I do not want the user to input the personal email address, and the hook's code should go and check the database what is the email address. I want some custom logic to be built in email address generation or username generation. Is that possible using the hooks?
So the question is, you don't want the user to give an email address. You want to pull that out of a database or generate it for them?
Yes, generate for them.
So there's a couple ways of handling that. What we were showing was at registration time, you could do that determination. So certainly you could handle that. So you noticed in Sarah's demo, there was a bit of code that responded back to Okta with, let's see, where was it? The bit that had the UUID, right here. So there's, at time when you do a successful registration, you can send these commands to Okta, and one of those commands is to update the user profile. So you could imagine in your scenario, you would generate an email address for them, and then rather than updating the customer ID attribute, you could then update their email address attribute or something like that. We also do have another hook available for import. So if you're using Okta to synthesize a bunch of different identity sources, let's say you have like an Active Directory and a Workday and some other systems, you'll often have these conflicts. You'll have the third person named John Doe and you want to determine what their user count should be. You have a hook into that part there where you can then figure out what the right format should be, because every company has a different one. When I was at Microsoft, it was only 8 characters, so like a human would have to come up with a clever one for you. Most companies will have an automated process that you can use, so you can certainly do that. Other
Thank
questions? Whoever.
Hi. In Okta hooks, what format are you using for the events you're emitting? Are you looking at using some of the developing open standards like cloud events?
They are cloud events. Other questions? Whoever's got the mic can ask the question. Yeah.
Okay, so where do we have a list of all the hooks that are in there and a way to submit requests for new hooks? Yeah.
There's, I believe, a beta page. Have you looked into this? Yeah, I think so. So I would look into the betas. So just go through your standard, Okta beta process.
Right.
And
we're on a beta for a few of them, but we want all the best hooks, right? So everything in the logic that we could possibly hook that for our custom logic, we want to be able to have that. And one other question is, in the future, when we're getting towards this workflow engine, is there an even more dynamic way to, or perceived to add the hooks?
So this is in the realm of the forward-looking statements. I will speak more just generally. It's HTTP, right? And so the workflow engine that we acquired does allow you to do HTTP-based integrations. And so certainly, anything that supports HTTP can be used to connect in. From the little brief, I only heard about that acquisition a few days before everybody else here did, so I got to play with it very briefly, and it does look like you would be able to use that pretty easily. Other questions?
How many custom domains do you support for one organization? You used to have just one?
At the moment, so the question is, so Okta gives you the ability to have a custom domain for your Okta org, and it looks something like this. So for this Okta org, I have a custom URL domain here. And so I'm able to say, instead of saying ticketco, it's login.ticketco.org. At the moment, we only support one per Okta org. I'd say definitely we're always open for feedback around other use cases around that, but let us know. Other questions?
Hi. Do you have any limitations on the kind of hooks or the kind of events that could be used for hooks?
Explain a little bit more, and also where are you in? There you are. Okay, cool.
Okay. So, for example, are they just user-based events, or can you do something like when an import happens from a directory, and if there's a specific condition, can you trigger a hook on that, or?
So sure. So the question is, where can you get these hooks from? And I'll answer that. There's basically two basic flavors of hooks from Okta, one of which is a synchronous hook. So essentially this idea that there are certain hooks like the registration and the import hooks which will actually pause the Okta process. So you've got like 100 to 200 milliseconds to respond back before the user starts getting grouchy about it. And those are available right now in terms of self-service registration and the user import. And then we also allow you to add claims or attributes into SAML and OIDC tokens. And we're going to be adding more in that flavor. So those are like the ones that will actually affect the user experience. We have another flavor which is basically events coming off the syslog, and those are asynchronous. So it can take anywhere from 100 to a couple thousand milliseconds for that webhook to fire out from Okta. And we're starting with a small list of hooks, like of events that you can look for, and then growing from there. You can also just pull our syslog through the API to look for the events that you want, and I do have some sample code on our blog that shows you how to do that. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. Someone was shaking their head like, polling bad. Yes, I agree. But there's all these different ways of doing that. Other question? Yep.
Yeah, I just have a more simple question.
Sure.
When we go through the process to unlock it, is there any license implication? Like, is there a certain level? Is this something that's available to us? Because I'll go unlock it. I just want to make sure cost-wise.
So the question is, how is this being licensed? And if I recall, so I'm a programmer and therefore adverse to anything with pricing involved, which is not a good trait. But I believe it's part of lifecycle management. So if you're licensed for lifecycle management, the Okta hook should come with that.
Hello. Question for you.
Yes.
Thank you for the demo. I'm very curious as to what a returning user's experience would be. Say, for example, like a week later, a month later. We saw in your demo signing up and registering and getting that email link.
Sure.
Maybe they went through the process, purchased tickets. What happens if they come back a week later? Like, how are they accessing and authenticating and verifying? Is it the same process every time?
It would likely be different. So this is like hot off the presses. So I would imagine that what you would do at that point, there's different ways you can tune that experience. So I'd say at the very base, you'd want to have a way for them to come in through that magic link because they have no password. Or in a real world scenario, you might want to have them use some other like type of verifier like a YubiKey or an Okta Verify push or something like that. Ideally, you don't want them to have a password. It could go various ways. So it depends on your sort of threat model and your risk stance, but you could have the sessions last really long time, in which case the user would return later, and as long as they're on the same browser and they still have their information, they'd come in. Otherwise, you'd want to build an experience out where they would say, well, I need to sign in with an existing account, and then you would have them enter in their email address and then go through the magic link prompt. Other questions? I think we've got time
over here.
For like
I'm just wondering if there's a way to tie hooks to a particular application or authorization server, because I may not want a hook to trigger on every particular registration event, but only for particular applications.
Sure. So, so the question was, could you have these hooks trigger not every time? But I think I'd be interested to hear what the use case is for that. So the basic question is like, I don't want a hook to fire for every event. I only want to handle a small subset of them. Definitely let us know about the use cases for that. But I think generally, you have your Nginx do that, or your front end do that determination for you, and in terms of user experience, you can have that determination done in like 50 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds. It's going to be fast, and then proxy it onto the other downstream system. It's just HTTP. You just do it any way that you do. If you have like a WebSocket there that's idling, you're going to have the same kind of logic there where you're like, I don't have any data right now, so go away really quickly. But let us know. Well, let us know what the use case is.
So this is what I'm seeing here is like a synchronous interruption to the authorization flow. Are there any plans in the future to have more like an asynchronous pause in the authorization flow, or you send them down like a different UI flow, like maybe send them over to like a flow, like a UI flow that we're creating as a custom flow, where we can grab more dynamic user interactive data, and then kind of once we gather that and set up some custom stuff, return back the process to Okta so they can return the access token? Is there anything like that?
It's definitely something that we're thinking about. It's a little complex, and I think part of the reason why we have the identity engine is to lay the groundwork for that. The basic question he has is, how deeply can I customize that flow? So what you saw was all out of the box prompting. So it was like, what's your password? Enter in your MFA token. Give us extra information about your user. We have a lot of plumbing underneath, so we'd have to give you a way of defining your own UI that would be prompted to the user. And these are all things that we're looking into and building the foundational work for. I would say in the interim, there's a lot of things you can do in between. So one of the things I've worked with customers on is just putting people into like a temporary group that has like a lot of a lower, maybe have like a pending registration group. So one of the things that happens sometimes is people will do like identity proofing. They'll want to validate that the user is who they say they are, so it can take minutes, days, weeks. So that flow can be tricky. So the general recommendation now is like put them into a pending state, do your thing out of band, and then pull them into the proper groups once they've finished that. I think in your case you're thinking more on like the order of like hundreds to thousands of milliseconds that you're looking for in that process. It's near term we are looking into that, but nothing really we can talk about right now.
So it's like the identity engine verifies the provided user information is valid against only with Experian or any other?
Sorry, speak up a little bit.
Okay, yep. So the identity engine, how does the identity engine verifies the provided user information is valid? Is it only against with Experian that it verifies, or should the user be enrolled in the Okta?
So the question was, how does the identity engine validate users? Is that the basic question?
So like, let's say when you are enrolling with the Ticketo, you provide any information like first name, last name, and email address. How does the identity engine verifies that provided information is valid?
Oh, I see.
And,
so the identity engine gives you the ability to work with like third-party providers. The identity engine isn't doing that.
So may I know like what are all the sources? Like how does you verify?
So Okta, the identity engine is not like a way of validating identities. It's generally breaking down the various flows inside of Okta. So if you want to do that particular use case of validating a user, you'd want to build out your own custom code using an existing kind of proofing company like Experian or some of the other companies like that. It's not built into the identity engine. The basics of the identity engine is taking this existing framework that we have for authenticating, authorizing users, and allowing you to plug into it.
Okay.
You can come find us afterwards. So we're at time now. Thank you, everybody. I'll be available. Me and Sarah will be just off the side. Come and talk to us if you have questions. Thank you.